Welcome back to Catasta Charisma Working with Latex Part 8, in which we start piecing our work together. I'm first going to turn my attention to the shorter black dress and describe the stages of piecing the individual front and back sections together to form larger overall front and back sections. I will then turn my attention to the longer white dress, which follows the same stages of piecing, but where I will talk more fully about the approach I take. We are first going to apply glue lines down certain edges of our sections. So first of all, lay down your sections upon some paper, just to protect your work surface from any glue overspill that might later transfer to your work. It is just to keep your work surface clean. All side sections for the front and back regions are placed face side up, as these are underlaying sections, while the centre front and back parts are placed face side down. The glue lines for the face side down sections are the purple coloured seams on the pattern templates, and the glue lines for the face side up sections are the green coloured seams. When producing seams through the gluing method, the edges of the face side down sections will come to overlap the edges of the face side up sections. The overlap is what forms the seams of the garment, and for this pattern they are 6 mm wide. These are applied down the two long edges of the front and back sections and the singular long edge of the side sections. If you wish, you can make your glue lines around 8 mm wide, but bear in mind a few things. This pattern has already reduced down the measurements of the body size it is aimed to fit by at least 8%, so it is already very skin tight. By making the seams wider, one will make the fit yet more tighter. It will also make it slightly more difficult to piece the seams together successfully. Work with a glue mix of around 80% glue to 20% thinners. Don't go any much lower than a 70-30 dilution. Apply the glue as cleanly and evenly as you can with whatever tool of application you prefer. If you prefer, you can mark out the width of the glue line you seek to make before applying any glue, but we try to avoid this technique as much as possible, as it can make the cleaning up of the marks afterwards difficult, and if using any form of rubber that has a transparent quality to it, it can trap the marks under the rubber, but which can still be cleanly seen underneath. The edges of the rubber will react to the solvents in the glue, softening and swelling up a bit like this, which forces the rubber to arch up and possibly curl underneath itself. While we may curse this, it is a good. It is what produces a stronger bond for the glue to the rubber. To avoid the drying glue from sticking to the paper, just slightly shift the section of rubber on the paper immediately after applying the glue. Don't worry about any curled edges sticking to themselves. Don't attempt to flatten the work or uncurl any edges while the glue is wet. We always wait until the glue has become touch dry, by which time the rubber would have largely relaxed back to its normal resting state. The seams we are about to piece together are what I call shaping seams. In effect, they force the two-dimensional quality of the rubber sheeting to take on three-dimensional properties. You will often hear that the only means to successfully piece such seams is to stretch the rubber. This is wrong. There is never ever any need to stretch rubber deliberately unless we use stretching as a technique in itself, such as with certain kinds of gathering. The reason why stretching is often stated as the only way to piece shaping seams is because misalignment can occur. This is where we note that once a seam has been pieced together, that one section has overrun and another fallen short of the ends meeting up. At times, with long seams, this can look extreme. Despite it looking as if one section's edge is too short and the other section's too long, both sections' edges will in fact be the same length. The reasons for why misalignment happens requires a video all to itself, but can be found explained within the manual. The solution to the problem, however, is not to be found in stretching any rubber to get the ends to meet up. This only produces distortions in the garment on wearing. The real solution is to alternate our working perspective. Simply put, to flip our work over at given intervals so that we are viewing it at one stage from a face-side perspective and then an underside perspective. For this particular garment, a good place to start one's piecing is at the waistline balance markers, overlapping the waistline marker of the front or back section over the waistline balance marker of one of the neighbouring side sections by 6 mm. Start from a face side perspective and overlay for just a few centimetres out from the balance marker in both directions towards the bottom of the dress and the top. Now flip the work over and carry on piecing, but now from an underside perspective. Continue laying down the seam towards the next set of balance markers around the hip and bust regions. When you reach these balance markers, flip the work over to the face side perspective and carry on. At various stages of working, you may discover that either you are not going to make one balance marker align with the neighbouring one, or that the end of the section is going to run short of meeting the end of the neighbouring one. In this case, peel back the seam to a point just beyond where you initially started laying it at that stage, and try again. If you discover that a balance marker is going to run past another balance marker, or that the end of a section will overrun the end of its neighbour, then flip the work over to a different working perspective, peel back the seam a centimetre or so, and continue laying it down. In the video, you will see me constantly flipping my work back and forth between different perspectives, peeling back the seams multiple times and trying again, until everything works out. So long as we don't press our overlapping edge down firmly as we piece, we will still have plenty of opportunity to peel back seams without fear of disturbing any glue surfaces. Initially, all we are seeking to do is to get our seams into position. Only once we are happy with our seams do we then apply more pressure upon the seams, first by stroking over our seams to give them better purchase, and then by pressing with a roller. Take care on the front section around the bust area. The more sharply turning curve of the bust on the side front section can be a little tricky. Rather than seek to fully flatten this seam as we work it around, just try and take the very edge of the overlaying section to the innermost edge of the underlaying section's glue line. As the garment takes shape, the rubber will arch over the width of the seam. If we flatten the seam rather than allow it to become naturally arched, we will either form a dimple in our seam and possible creases. When we come to smooth the seam down on the front bust area, just check the seam from the underside perspective to make sure that there are no undulating edges where one section hasn't made full contact with the other. If this has happened, then smooth the undulating edge down over the ball of your thumb and not flat on the work surface. After you've pressed your seams, check them from both the face and underside perspectives. Run a fingernail down the edges of the overlapping, if needed, to see if there are any loose regions. If there are any loose regions, wiggle a little glue under the edge. Let the glue dry and then smooth down and press. If you do have any slight overruns of rubber at either end of the seams, trim these down. Finally, clean down the seams with thinners using a soft cloth to remove any residual glue and markings. The spray you see me using is a blue milk conditioner that prevents the rubber from sticking together after it has been cleaned, and which doesn't interfere with any later stages of glue application. So let's see the process again with the longer white dress. This time I'm going to talk a bit more personally about what I am doing. One can mark out the glue line width of 6 mm, and so as a consequence the seam width overlap down your edges if truly, as a beginner, you feel you need a more clear visible guide to help reduce your seams. But don't make this a technique of habit. I have got into a habit of placing paper under my work when applying glue along edges. Other people don't like this because of the absorbency of paper. The glue can soak into the paper and as it dries stick the paper to the rubber of any curling edges. This is why I always shift the work slightly on the paper immediately after applying glue or slightly shift the paper under the work. Other folk will use plastic or glass under their work. I don't like this because it doesn't absorb the glue but rather leaves a skin, which on drying can spring back onto the work. Neither absorbent nor non-absorbent surfaces are better than the other. They are what we individually get on better with. Some folk will work directly on the work surface and clean them down from time to time to remove any residual glue. Others work on sticky surfaces such as die cutting mats to prevent rubber from curling, or even make their own mats by applying glue on such things as tracing paper or working upon rubberized fabric. It really is each to their own. Some people will clean all the edges of their work before applying glue to remove the powders that rubber comes coated in from the manufacturer. I only do this if it is extreme, otherwise none of my garments have ever fallen apart by not cleaning it off. I will clean down edges on light or transparent rubber to remove any markings that might become trapped within and so still visible through a seam. Our individual approaches to any form of crafting reflects our personal methodology. Some folk are much more methodical, whilst others are more carefree. It is not up to us to dictate what anyone's personal approach should be. It is in the joy we get from the act of making and the end result of our endeavours that count. Some people get a vast satisfaction from the neat and clean production of a seam, whilst others don't care so much, so long as their seam holds and doesn't disturb the lay of the garment too much on the body. Some people apply more time and energy into their creativity of realizing their wildest imaginings, whilst others have a more conservative aesthetic and seek to become true artisans in their craft. And we are mixtures of extremes. What I'm driving at, particularly for any beginner, is that initially don't seek perfection, don't even expect it. Even more so, don't think that perfection has to be a wonderfully made garment. Perfection is what you make it and will be the driving force of ever wanting to improve, whether that is in a scene production or realizing crazy ideas or both. When I say apply a 6mm glue line, you don't have to. I can be as sloppy as fuck at times when I apply my glue. I only try to be far more even, consistent and smooth in my application when working with transparent rubbers. Any residual glue I clean off afterwards. Yes, listen to the advice I give, it comes from experience and will steer you in a good direction. But don't let it give you anxiety. Don't see me or anyone else or even your own self hovering above you and shaking their heads because you have deviated slightly in your piecing of a seam. You know I am a carefree maker in my own approach as I slap my work all over the place, flipping it back and forth from different perspectives, knowing full well that those glue lines could be picking up bits of dirt, cat hairs, dust, old glue, and sticking accidentally to one another. But you should also know that I'm doing this with a full realization that all this could be happening. It gives me no anxiety that it could be. I know I can always clean things down and apply more glue later. I also know from experience what I can and can't get away with. But for others, this would cause them to freak out, and they prefer a slower and more careful approach. So you may see some methods of rubber garment construction in which, after glue has dried, the areas have scotch tape or cellophane overlaid upon them to protect the glue. This protective coat is then removed in stages as the seams are pieced. Such an approach would drive me insane, but that is not to say it is wrong. For me, yes, it would increase my anxiety, my frustration, but for others it does the opposite. It provides relief. When we are crafting, what we don't want is anxiety. We don't want increased stress levels. What we want is a nice flow of dopamines, forever motivating us forward, forever keeping us going. You will probably know that different people use different tools for applying glue. I largely use long-handled brushes. Others use spatulas, others foam brushes. You will also have seen me use offcuts of bath sponge. Very often the preference of one over the other has nothing to do with which is best for the job when it comes to glue lines. More often it has to do with familiarity. I come from the background of a painter and so have a preference for brushes. Others come from a background with spatula spreading of substances is more common, even if that background harkens to primary school. Yes, they can all be used differently and with the aim of producing specific results, such as spatulas for more evenly spread and smooth coatings of glue, brushes for greater diversity of movement and application, sponge for covering larger areas more swiftly. But one is neither better than the other. They are all different and all have their purposes. So if you see me use a brush, that doesn't mean you have to. You can use a spatula. When I do say use something specifically though, it is with good intentions, as I believe you will get a much better result, a more successful outcome, and have an easier time with it. And when I say things like don't stretch the rubber, this I do mean. I also know that you will, for I know I do. Even when we try our best not to, we accidentally will. Sometimes the stretching of rubber occurs on an imperceptible level, and so is inevitable. I also know that when I say don't stretch the rubber, I also know that at some level we have to. So what I'm really saying is avoid it as much as you possibly can, but don't give yourself a hard time over it. As one gains experience in working with rubber, it isn't really the techniques I am informing you about that you will be gaining. Yes, you will become more familiar with the techniques. You may exceed what I can do with them. You may decide for yourself that you don't have to be amazing all the time and come to see where you can cut corners in your methodology without sacrificing anything for the final result. And yes, you will become more familiar with the various orders in which we can piece garments together. The experience you will gain will simply come from handling the material and working with the tools and substances involved, from their apparent mistakes and blunders along the way. I won't say these aren't mistakes. If you didn't get the result you were after, then you made some mistake. But what you should also view them as is accidentally stumbling across a new technique. The result of a technique that we see as a mistake is a technique we use deliberately tomorrow. Just as with the first dress then, I placed my sections down on paper first. Side sections face side up, centre front and back sections face side down. Cleaned around the edges of any markings or excess powders, applied a 6mm glue line down the relevant edges, shifted the work on the paper to avoid any edges sticking to the paper, and I let all the glue dry. The paper was then removed. Piecing was then started by overlaying the face-side waistline balance markers of the central sections to the waistline balance markers of the side sections, and then flipping my work perspective back and forth from face side to underside to maintain alignment between the sections. When happy with how the seams were placed, I smooth them down with my fingers and then press with a roller. Clean the seams down and trim off any slight overruns of rubber at the shoulder and hem. Thanks for watching, and join me for part 9 where I shall be adding decorative trim and snap fasteners to the larger dress.